This video reviews Section A of the 2020 Election Administration and Voting Survey, or EVES. This section seeks to understand how individuals registered to vote between 2018 and 2020 and efforts to keep voter registration rolls up to date. You can find similar presentations for the other 5 sections of the survey on the EVES portal. As you watch this video, you might want to follow along with the PDF version of the survey, which can be found on the Downloads page of the EVES portal. Section A of EVES asks for 4 types of data on voter registration. First, how many voters were registered and eligible to vote in the November 2020 election? Second, how many registration forms did your jurisdiction process between the 2018 and 2020 general elections, and what was the source of those forms? Third, how many confirmation of registration notifications did your jurisdiction send in that time period? Finally, how many voters were removed from the registration rolls during that time period? Question A1 asks how many people in your jurisdiction were registered and eligible to vote in the November 2020 election. This count should include anyone who registered before your jurisdiction's registration deadline and anyone who used same-day voter registration, if applicable in your jurisdiction. However, you should not include anyone whose registration was received after the deadline or anyone who pre-registered to vote but was not 18 years old by the time of the election. Your jurisdiction might distinguish between active and inactive voters. Active voters have no additional processing requirements to fulfill before they can vote, while inactive voters require address verification before they can cast a ballot. If this distinction applies to your jurisdiction, then you will report the total number of active voters in A1B and the total number of inactive voters in A1C. These 2 items should add up to the total number of registered and eligible voters you reported in A1A. However, if your jurisdiction doesn't count inactive and active voters separately, then you will again report the number of registered and eligible voters in question A1B so that A1B will equal A1A. Then, for A1C, you will report does not apply. Question A2 asks about same-day voter registration. If your jurisdiction allows anyone to register on the same day they cast a ballot, you'll report the total number of same-day registrants in A2A. When you calculate this number, you should include people who used same-day registration on Election Day during the early voting period, or who registered and voted on a day when early voting and the voter registration period overlapped. Then, provide the number of same-day registrations received on Election Day in A2B, and the number of same-day registrations received prior to Election Day in A2C. If data is reported for these items, their sum should equal the total number of same-day registrations reported in A2A. However, if you are unable to distinguish between these categories or cannot provide this breakdown, then you should report the total number of same-day registrations in A2A and report data not available in A2B and A2C. If your jurisdiction doesn't allow for same-day voter registration, then you will report does not apply for all items in question A2. The rest of Section A asks you to report data from the close of registration for the 2018 general election through the close of registration for the 2020 general election. For example, let's say your registration period closes 15 days before a general election. That means the last day to register for the 2018 general election was October 22nd, 2018. So your reporting period for the 2020 EVES will begin on October 23rd, 2018. Since the last day to register to vote for the 2020 general election is October 19th, 2020, that date will be the end of your reporting time frame. Or let's say your state allows for election day registration and voters can register on election day and cast a ballot for the 2020 election. In this case, you'll report data from November 7, 2018 through November 3, 2020. Again, state laws on registration deadlines vary widely. While you're answering the remainder of Section A, keep in mind how your state's registration deadlines apply so that you answer these questions correctly. Question A3 asks about registration forms your jurisdiction received during that time frame we just discussed. In A3A, you'll report the total number, and in the rest of your question, you'll break down this total by the type of registration form. New registrations should be reported in A3B. Pre-registrations of people under the age of 18 should be reported in A3C. Duplicate registrations submitted by persons who were already registered to vote should be reported in A3D. Invalid or rejected registrations that don't meet registration requirements should be reported in A3E. Changes to name, party, or within jurisdiction addresses by persons who are already registered to vote should be reported in A3F. And changes to address that move a registered voter to a new jurisdiction should be reported in A3G. If you have additional types of registrations to report aside from the categories listed in A3B through G, you can use the other categories in H, I, or J along with a description of the category. If you don't have any other types of registration forms to report, the other categories can be left blank. The numbers you report in A3B through J should sum to the total number of registration forms you reported in A3A. Please note that same-day registrations, election day registrations, and special category voters should not be reported separately in this question. For instance, if someone in your jurisdiction registered to vote on election day and submitted a form that was invalid or rejected, then you should report that registration form in A3E and not in one of the other categories. The next set of questions continues to ask about registration forms your jurisdiction received between the 2018 and 2020 general elections. Questions A4 through A7 ask about the modes by which these registration forms were submitted to the election office. Question A4 asks you to break down the overall number of registration forms received by mode. A5 asks you to break down the number of new registration forms by mode. A6 asks you to break down the number of duplicate registrations by mode. And A7 asks you to break down the number of invalid or rejected registrations by mode. This data will help the EAC track trends in voter registration across jurisdictions and across elections. These questions are asking you to further break down the totals you reported in question A3. For instance, the numbers you report in items A4A through I should sum to what you reported in A3A. Likewise, the numbers you report in A5A through I should sum to what you reported in A3B, and so on. For each type of registration form, you will report the source of the form or the mode by which it was received. This includes individual voters submitting their registrations by mail, fax, or email, individuals registering in person at an election office, individuals submitting their registrations online, individuals who register to vote at a motor vehicle office, individuals who register at a public assistance office mandated as a registration site under the National Voter Registration Act, individuals who register at state-funded agencies that serve persons with disabilities, individuals who register at armed forces recruitment offices, individuals who register at other state-designated agencies that are not mandated under the National Voter Registration Act, and individuals who register through registration drives conducted by advocacy groups or political parties. These modes are intended to be mutually exclusive. For instance, if a voter submits a registration form online using the state's online voter registration portal, this is an online registration that would be reported in the C items of these questions. However, if a form was filled out online but submitted through email or printed and mailed or faxed to the election office, it would be reported in the A items of these questions. If any registrations were reported through a mode that's not listed in these questions, you can use one of the other options in J, K, or L and include a description of the source. If your jurisdiction has same-day registrations to report, they should be categorized according to the mode used to submit the same-day registration application. For example, if a voter submits a same-day registration form at an election office, that would be reported in the B items of these questions. If a voter submits a same-day registration application at their polling place, this would be considered a separate category and should be entered in one of the other items. Because each state differs in what kinds of registration opportunities are available, you may not be able to provide a response to all the items in this set of questions. If your state or jurisdiction doesn't allow one of the sources listed, then you should report does not apply for these items. For instance, if there is no online registration in your state, then questions A4C, A5C, A6C, and A7C will not apply to you. If, however, your state allows registration applications to be submitted by one of the sources, but you cannot calculate how many applications were submitted through that source, then you will report data not available for those items. For instance, if you are in an NVRA state, but do not track how many registration forms were submitted through public assistance offices, then you'll report data not available in questions A4E, A5E, A6E, and A7E. Lastly, if the registration source is allowed, but no registration applications were submitted through that source between the 2018 general election and the 2020 general election, then you will report 0 in those items. For instance, if none of the registration forms submitted through a registration drive were duplicates of existing registrations, then you will report 0 in A6I. The final questions in Section A are about confirmation notices and people removed from your jurisdiction's registration list. Confirmation notices are notifications that are sent to registered voters who may no longer be eligible to vote in the jurisdiction in which they are currently registered. Some states send these notices because they are subject to the National Voter Registration Act, while other states send them for other reasons. Your state may use another term for these notifications, in which case you can include a description in the comments box for question A8. For EVES, registration removals are considered to be persons who are removed from the registration rolls because they have been deemed ineligible to vote. Registered voters who have been moved to an inactive status should not be reported in question A9. In question A8A, you'll report the total number of confirmation notices your jurisdiction sent out. For each notice, further classify it according to the categories listed in the question. If the notice was returned confirming the individual is still eligible to vote in your jurisdiction, record it in A8B. If the notice was returned confirming the individual is no longer eligible, record it in A8C. If the notice was returned as undeliverable, record it in A8D. If the status of the notice is unknown, record it in A8E. If your jurisdiction has another classification for these notices, report it in one of the other categories in F, G, or H. The numbers you report in A8B through A8H should equal the total number of confirmation notices you reported in A8A. If your jurisdiction is exempt from the NVRA, please still report data in A8, but use the comment space to explain why voters received a confirmation notice and how your jurisdiction's definition of confirmation notices differs from the NVRA's definition. Finally, in question A9, you'll report how many voters your jurisdiction removed from the registration list between the 2018 and 2020 general elections. Keep in mind that this question only applies to voters fully removed from the rolls, not voters who were moved to an inactive status. The total number of removed voters will be recorded in A9A, and in the rest of the question, you'll specify the reasons for removal. Registrations that were removed because the registrant moved outside of your jurisdiction should be reported in A9B. Removals because the registrant died should be reported in A9C. Removals because the registrant received a disqualifying felony conviction should be reported in A9D. Removals because the registrant did not respond to a confirmation notice and did not vote should be reported in A9E. Removals because the registrant was declared mentally incompetent should be reported in A9F. And removals made at the registrant's request should be reported in A9G. If a removal happened for another reason aside from those already listed, it should be reported in one of the other options in A9H, A9I, or A9J. The numbers you report in A9B through A9J should sum to the total number of removed voters you reported in A9A. If one of the reasons for removal does not apply in your state, then report does not apply in that item. For instance, if your state does not remove people from the registration rolls because of a disqualifying felony conviction, then you will report does not apply in A9D. We appreciate you taking the time to watch this video. We encourage you to carefully read through each section before answering any of the questions to ensure you're accurately reporting your data. A PDF of all EVES questions is on the downloads page of the EVES portal. We also encourage you to use the comment boxes for each question to provide us with additional information and context. This will help us analyze and report your data accurately. If you need additional assistance with anything related to EVES, please don't hesitate to contact us at eavs@forsmarshgroup.com. Thank you, and we appreciate your time and your contributions to the 2020 EVES.